Bank of Japan keeps interest rates and slashes economic growth. The U.S. unemployment claims unexpectedly increase. And the IMF warns countries in Middle East and North Africa face significant economic challenges. Welcome to Qnews' Economic Bulletin. We start off with Asia, where the Bank of Japan kept interest rates steady and slashed its economic growth and inflation forecasts in a quarterly outlook report. The board suggested that uncertainty surrounding U.S. tariffs and the hit of exports could keep policy in a holding pattern for some time. It said underlying inflation would accelerate after a period of stagnation as a tight job market lifted wages, signaling that the hit from U.S. tariffs was likely to be temporary. The BOJ now expects underlying consumer inflation to reach levels consistent with the 2% target around the latter half of the fiscal year of 2026 and onward, pushing back the timing by around a year from the previous report in January. Chinese representatives rejected U.S. claims of overcapacity and condemned the United States for violating World Trade Organization trade rules. They argued that there is no standard for assessing overcapacity and condemned U.S. tariffs for disrupting the global trade and harming developing countries. The Chinese delegation stated that the U.S. reciprocal tariffs disrupt the global trade and harm developing countries, while China positions itself as a stabilizer in international trade. They accused the U.S. of adhering to a zero-sum mindset, prioritizing its own interests over mutual benefits in trade. They also criticized the U.S. subsidies under the Chips and Science Act for distorting markets and undermining WTO rules. Air India expects to face around $600 million in additional costs if a ban from Pakistan's airspace lasts for a year. It has asked the federal government to compensate it for the hit. Indian Airlines are bracing for higher fuel costs and longer journey times after Pakistan shut its airspace to the country's carriers. Earlier, Air India asked the Indian government for a subsidy model proportionate to the economic hit, estimating a loss of more than 50 billion Indian rupees for each year the ban lasts. In South America, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro announced a 23% increase in the country's minimum integrated income for workers to $160 per month on April 30th, 2025. This increase includes a rise in bonuses, but leaves the base salary unchanged amid ongoing inflation, which the Venezuelan Finance Observatory estimates at 136% annually. The minimum integrated income has risen by $130 set in 2024. The basic salary remains at approximately $1.5 unchanged since March 2022. Maduro attributed the economic challenge to U.S. sanctions against the oil sector, stating that these latest sanctions against the oil company were aimed at taking away all their money.
Hemos hecho nuestro esfuerzo y estamos en disposición.
The Labour Department has reported that U.S. unemployment claims unexpectedly increased last week, indicating a potential rise in layoffs due to tariffs affecting the economy. Initial claims for state benefits rose by 18,000 to 241,000 for this week, ending April 26, exceeding expectations of 224,000. Additionally, the number of people receiving ongoing benefits rose by 83,000 to 1.916 million. While these claims do not directly impact April's employment report, which is expected to show an increase of 130,000 jobs, the labour market remains cautious, with the unemployment rate forecast to hold steady at 4.2%. President Donald Trump has delivered remarks on investing in America, requesting a little bit of time to address the recent contraction of the U.S. economy, which shrank at an annual rate of 0.3% in the first quarter. He attributed the downturn to stockpiling imports ahead of his tariffs and emphasized that companies have announced over $2 trillion in new investments, totaling nearly $8 trillion. Trump announced plans for a tariff wall for pharmaceutical companies operating in the U.S. and hinted at potentially cutting grants to Harvard University. He also urged Congress to pass his tax bill, which includes substantial tax cuts, while maintaining that the current economic situation is a reflection of the previous administration's failures.
Thank you, everybody. Where it belongs. And she's been incredible. She's very upset with Harvard. They have $53 billion in a fund, and yet they won since the election. The companies represented in this room have collectively announced more than $2 trillion in new investments, and we have a total of close to $8 trillion all told. And there's never been anything like that in this country. We've never had anything close. 100 days ago this week, we inherited the wreckage of 4 years of economic disaster under the previous administration. It was an economic disaster. It was a disaster at the border like nobody had ever seen before. And you probably see we've closed up the border 99.999%, meaning 3 people got in. 3. They buried companies in crippling regulations, waged war on American energy, pushed massive tax hikes, and gave us the worst inflation in the history of our country. In Biden's final year, the United States had the worst trade deficit ever recorded, and we lost 106,000 manufacturing jobs. Other than that, he's done a fantastic job.
President Donald Trump has stated that he has potential trade deals with India, South Korea, and Japan. He pointed out that he seeks to convert his tariff policy into trade agreements. Trump further added he was in no rush to conclude the deals because the United States is reaping the benefits of the tariffs he has imposed.
If you knew him, you would know that if they reached out, he knew everything about it. He runs it very tight, very strong, very smart, and pretty obvious that he has, but we will talk about it.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Ukrainian First Deputy Prime Minister Yulia Sarantenko have signed a minerals agreement. The agreement gives the United States preferential access to the new Ukrainian minerals deal and fund investments in Ukraine's reconstruction. Yulia Sarantenko added on X that the accord provides for Washington to contribute to the fund to attract global investment into the country. The two countries signed the accord in Washington after months of sometimes fraught negotiations, with uncertainty persisting until the last moment, with the word of an 11th hour snag. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has praised the minerals deal signed between the U.S. and Ukraine on social media. He called it a historic economic partnership and praised the U.S. President Donald Trump for tireless efforts to secure a lasting peace. Bessent added that the U.S. intends to look forward to quickly operationalizing the agreement.
I am glad to announce the signing of today's historic economic partnership agreement between the United States and Ukraine, establishing the United States-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund. This partnership allows the United States to invest alongside Ukraine to unlock Ukraine's growth assets, mobilize American talent, capital, and governance standards that will improve Ukraine's investment climate and accelerate Ukraine's economic recovery. The Development Finance Corporation will participate and help to establish this fund in collaboration with the government of Ukraine. Today's agreement signals clearly to Russian leadership that the Trump administration is committed to a peace process centered on a free, sovereign, and prosperous Ukraine over the long term. It's time for this cruel and senseless war to end. The killing must stop, and both the United States and the government of Ukraine look forward to quickly operationalizing this historic economic partnership.
On his part, Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andrei Sybiha stated that the minerals deal signed with the U.S. marks an important milestone in the two countries' strategic partnership, adding that it was aimed at strengthening Ukrainian economy and security. The deal establishes a joint investment fund for Ukraine's reconstruction. U.S. President Donald Trump has said that Americans don't need much of what China exports, as he dismissed the possible effect of a trade war on consumers caused by his triple-digit tariffs on China. Trump said at a meeting of his cabinet that the tariffs have hit China hard, and as a result, China's factories are not doing business. Trump downplayed the impact of fewer Chinese imports, saying that maybe the children will have $2 instead of $30, and maybe the $2 will cost a couple of bucks more than they normally would.
Maybe the children will have $2 instead of $30, you know, and maybe the $2 will cost a couple of bucks more than they would normally. But we're not talking about something that we have to go out of our way. They have ships.
And joining us from Washington is national security analyst John Rosamondo to discuss the latest developments related to the United States economy. Thank you, sir, for joining us here on the Economic Bulletin on Q News.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Let's start off by asking, President Trump attributed the recent 0.3% economic contraction to companies stockpiling ahead of tariffs. From an economic standpoint, how accurate or justified is this explanation?
Well, I think that the president is looking at what the companies are adjusting to the economic landscape that the president is creating as a result of his tariffs, so they hedge in cheaper prices ahead of the tariffs.
Okay, what about Trump's claims that nearly $8 trillion in total unannounced investments have been made since his return, with $2 trillion in recent pledges? How should we interpret these numbers in terms of an actual economic impact and business confidence in general?
Well, I think that it's too soon to figure out what the overall impact to the American economy will be with these $8 trillion investments, because it takes sometimes a few quarters to have the overall impact on the overall economy. But right now, the economy is absorbing the tariffs, and once things become more predictable for companies, it will stabilize.
Okay, so what risks or benefits do you see in Trump's proposed tariff wall targeting pharmaceutical companies operating in the U.S.? Could this lead to price increases for consumers?
Well, I mean, you're going to see cost pass the consumer, but President Trump's strategy here is to encourage reindustrialization and the rebuilding of the American industrial base that has been sapped by 30 years of unfair trade practices. We're looking at the struggle with China militarily. The U.S. does not have the industrial base that it needs for its security. So these tariffs are aimed at encouraging production inside the United States and to onshore the supply chain.
So the plan is basically that in the short term it might hurt, but on the long run it'll improve, U.S. industry in general.
That's the hope. I mean, we've been following a so-called free trade policy since the late 1980s, and as a result, we don't produce anything. President Trump wants to be able to rebuild our shipping industry, rebuild our manufacturing, and to provide jobs for Americans. So if you have, and that might also lead to companies that are currently offshore moving their operations inside the United States to get around the tariffs.
Well, since we're talking long term here, Trump also floated the idea of cutting grants to universities like Harvard. How could this move affect long-term innovation and the economy's knowledge base?
Well, let's put it this way. Harvard has nearly $60 billion with a B endowment, so surely Harvard can afford to fund its own research and development. And also, Harvard has been providing Chinese individuals with know-how that they've taken back to China. And we've had issues related to espionage. So I think the president is trying to say that the United States government shouldn't be in the business of subsidizing elite institutions that don't need welfare.
Okay, what about recent labor data? It showed a rise in unemployment claims, possibly linked to the tariffs. Are we seeing the early effects of protectionist policies filtering into the job market?
Well, I think that, like we said before, you're going to have some short-term pain for long-term gain. I think the thing is whenever you have a new issue hit the economy, it takes a while for it to absorb, but ultimately it will shoot back as the economy reaches a new equilibrium.
Okay, now, one of the other big things is the U.S.-Ukraine minerals deal, and it's framed as both an economic and strategic investment. How significant is it economically for the U.S., and how might it influence investor confidence when it comes to places like conflict zones?
Again, the United States is always looking eastward at China. China has a corner on the world's rare earths, and President Trump is looking for a way for the United States to generate economic revenue to support our reindustrialization effort. And Ukraine has it. I don't know if this will have any impact on getting Vladimir Putin to stop the war, but from an economic standpoint, it makes sense for the United States and also gives Ukraine a benefit for its economy.
Okay, from Washington, that was a national security analyst, John Rosamondo. Thank you for your insights and thank you for joining us here on Q. And now we move on to the latest developments from the MENA region. The International Monetary Fund warns that countries in the Middle East and North Africa face significant economic challenges due to tariff measures, lower oil prices, and cuts to financial aid. In its latest report, the IMF projects Brent crude prices will range from $65 to $69 a barrel in 2025 and 2026, making energy exporting economies vulnerable to market fluctuations. IMF Director Yahed Azur stated that global uncertainty could negatively impact growth by 2% to 4.5%. while growth in the MENA region is expected to be 2.6% this year, up from 1.8% last year. Azur emphasized the need for countries to implement protective policies.
Growth in MENA is expected to improve in 2025 by 0.8% and will reach 2.6% this year compared to 1.8% last year. However, the increase in uncertainty due to the geopolitical tension and the recent tariff measures have had a negative impact on the outlook for the region. Of course, this impact is differentiated between countries. Direct impact is limited because of the limited interconnection or dependence on trade with the US, except few countries like Jordan or Tunisia. However, indirect impact could be large.
Saudi Arabia's economy grew by 2.7% year-on-year in the first quarter of 2025, driven by a 4.2% increase in non-oil activities as the kingdom diversifies away from hydrocarbons. The General Authority of Statistics reported that government activities also rose by 3.2%. However, oil activities decreased by 1.4%. The authority has updated its data collection methods, revising nominal and real gross domestic product figures to better reflect the non-oil sector's significance. Fahd al-Dosari, president of the authority, emphasized that local demand for more detailed statistics as key drivers for the growth. Going now live to Washington, D.C., where U.S. President Donald Trump takes part in the National Day of Prayer event.
Then when Ben, recommends you, I have no choice, right? But you're doing great, Attorney General Pam Bondi, she's slightly busy. She's on the busy side with all of the... You have a big assortment of everything when you think of it. She's got every form of crime known to mankind and womankind, too. You always have to say that as a politician. But she's doing incredible work. Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi, thank you. Good job. A man that I can't talk about because he goes undercover most of the time. His whole life is now undercover, but he's central casting when you get to see him, I tell you. He's a handsome guy. If I was casting a movie for the CIA, I'd put this guy in it. Director of the CIA, John Ratcliffe. Where is John? John? See? He's undercover. He's here, but he's undercover. He's perfect. U.S. Trade Representative, Jameson Greer, another busy one, huh? Jameson? Good. And another one who's negotiating along with Scott and Jameson. He's negotiating all the time. He doesn't want to talk about it. He has no life. Howard Lutnick, Commerce. He has no life. And a very special person, a friend of mine for a long time, and she's doing an unbelievable job at small business, which is really big business. When you add up all that small business, it's probably the biggest bank in the world. But she is really capable and doing a fantastic job. We're working with Linda McMahon also on the student loans, getting them paid up. Administrator Kelly Loeffler. Kelly, thank you very much. And we're also joined by some special senators. Roger Marshall. Roger, you are a great guy. Whenever I have a problem, he's calling, sir, don't worry about it. I said, thanks, Roger. It's easy for you to say, Roger. But he always is so good. He's a good man. James Lankford. James, I saw you on television. You were fantastic on television. James was defending me on television. Something that's not easy to do, but he did a good job. Thank you, James. And Mark Wayne Mullen. Mark Wayne, where are you? Don't ever fight Mark Wayne. Yep, thank you, Mark Wayne. Don't ever fight him. He was a fighter. And Cindy Hyde-Smith is here. Cindy, hi, Cindy. Wow. And we have thanks, Cindy, you're doing great. I looked at your numbers. You're very popular. You don't need me to go out and campaign with you this year, huh? Isn't that good? Representatives Mark Harris, Mary Miller, Gary Palmer, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Robert Adderholt, Jason Smith, Chris Smith, Tim Wahlberg, and Josh Brenkeen. Thank you all for being here. And we have some others, but I can't see them. I just cannot see them, so I'm going to get myself in trouble. They'll never vote for me again, Ben. That's the problem. You know, if you don't mention, hi, Mary, but Mary will. Thank you also to Senior Advisor Pastor Paula White, who has been so incredible. She's been right from the beginning, Paula, right? And we had like a 94% poll number, and I think Paula got it more than I got it. She's saying, no, I'm telling you, he's a good person. Well, we don't like him. We don't like him. I'm telling you, he's done more for us than anybody. Oh, okay. And she got us up to about 94%. And my old friends, they couldn't believe that I got that kind of a number with you, understand? But you have done a great job, and Jenny Korn has done an unbelievable job. Jenny? And, you know, they work right out of the White House. They've never done that. That's never been done before. No other president allowed that. I think, you know, they say separation. They say separation between church and state, they told me. I said, all right, let's forget about that for one time. We said, really, the separation? I don't know. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not sure. But whether there's separation or not, you guys are in the White House where you should be, and you're representing our country. And we're bringing religion back to our country, and it's a big deal. And I want to say hello, John, the most talented man standing here today. He's one of the most successful artists, and his song is one of the most favored by people of religion. That I can tell you, John. You've done a great job. I always say he's the husband of Paula White, but actually he's very successful. That's always tough to live with, right, John? But not really, because you have an incredible wife that you're proud of, right? Well, that's good. Oh, he just gave her a kiss. That's the first time they've kissed in years. No, I'm only kidding. Great job, actually. The person that's been with me maybe the longest, and she's been just an incredible person, never asks for anything, never wants favors or, gee, could I use your helicopter to get here or there, is named Alveda King, and she's here someplace. Is that, hi, Alveda. She was here before it was popular, before I had record numbers with the black vote. She was here long before I had record numbers, right? Alveda saw something. Yeah, she was here at the very, very beginning when we were polling on the low side with the black population. Now we're setting records with the black population. We got criminal justice reform done. We got the black colleges and universities, you know. I got that financed for. It was a very interesting story because for 2-3 years, I'd see these really great people, like 50 of them, or maybe a little more. They'd come up to Washington looking for money for historically black colleges and universities, and they'd come up, and the first time was okay. I helped them get it. I got it for them, and that was it. Then the next year they came up, and I said, why are you up here? We took care of you. They said, no, they make us come up every year. I said, you got to be kidding. So we took care of them, Speaker. We got them long-term 10-year financing, more money than they were asking for. And I would say, I think I'm the most popular with those 50 people. They like me. They couldn't believe it because they were forced to come out. This is for 40 years. Every year they'd come up, you know that, Ben. They'd come up, and some of them became friends of mine because they'd come up looking for money all the time. And I said, we got to get you like some long-term money. And I said to them, the only bad thing is I'll probably never see you again. And largely, but I see a couple of them here, largely that happened. But I took care of them, but they never had to come up. So it was a big thing. It was talked about last night, actually, on television. Today, as the American people turn to God in prayer, we continue a tradition older than our independence itself. Nearly 250 years ago, on June 12, 1775, the Continental Congress appointed a day of fasting and prayer so that Americans fighting for their liberty could seek the help of the Almighty. And when you look at that, June 12th, 1775, so we have a very, very special day coming up. You know, we have a lot of them during this term. And interestingly, I had none of them had I not had a rigged election. Had the election not been rigged, I would have been out of here. I would have been gone. The radical left would have said, we got rid of him finally. But no, now they have me for another 4 years. We talk about that. And in the other 4 years, you know, I sort of said, I got the Olympics to come in, and I got the World Cup to come in. And I said, you know, the sad part is it's going to be in the, would be the third term. None of it came in during the, what would be the normal, you know, the more normal way of doing it, like counting the proper votes, et cetera, and just going on. I wouldn't have been president. But now we end up with 4 years later, and we have the 250-year anniversary, and that will be June 12th, 250 years. And you have Flag Day, so there's something happening on Flag Day. It's my birthday. But so you have 250 years in this term. You have the Olympics in this term. We have the Olympics going to Los Angeles. And we have the World Cup. And I was very instrumental in all three of them. They said, would you do it? Because another president refused to call. They needed for the Olympics and the World Cup, they needed the support of the president. And that particular president refused to talk to them. He didn't want to talk to them. I don't know why exactly, but he didn't want to talk. So they said, could you talk? And so I talked, and I talked them into it. And we got those two, and we have 250 years. So this is going to be really 4 years of celebration. So get ready. And we're going to always bring God with us. We're going to bring God to those celebrations. We're not going to forget about God. In a letter to wife Abigail, John Adams wrote of his first National Day of Prayer, millions will be upon their knees at once before their great Creator, imploring his forgiveness and blessing and asking for his favor on the American cause. Beautiful. Today, more than 2.5 centuries later, in the heart of a free and proud America, we rejoice that God answered those prayers. And I think God answered other prayers because he's put in an administration to run this country that's going to make you proud again. It's going to make you believe and believe more again. And we're going to have a country that's very strong. We're already in just 100 days. We're respected all over the world. Every leader's calling, want to have a meeting, appointments. They weren't calling so much last few years. They had no respect for our country. Our country was doing very, very poorly, as you know. Millions and millions of people pouring into our borders from jails and mental institutions and gang members. It was a terrible situation. And yesterday, I don't know if Kristi Noem is here or Tom Homan, but yesterday we had the lowest, safest border in history, 99.999. In other words, 3 people got in, 3. And in the previous, it was hundreds of thousands of people were coming in. We had 3 people. And we have it locked down, but we are allowing people in, but they have to come in legally. So it's a big thing. So I think it's a very big thing. It's just so appropriate that here we are. So many things are happening, so many great things, and we won't let countries rip us off anymore. You know, a lot of people like to talk about tariffs. Well, tariffs is exactly what they were doing for us. You know, when you want to defend that, they're a beautiful thing for us if you can use them, if you can get away with using them. It's going to make us very rich. We'll be paying off debt. We'll be lowering your taxes very substantially because so much money will be taken in that we'll be able to lower your taxes even beyond the tax cut that you're going to be getting, hopefully, with the big, beautiful bill. And so it's one of those things which I think it's just a really amazing time. The spirit that we have in this country right now is greater than I've ever seen it before. And it started on November 5th when we won every swing state. We won the popular vote by millions. We won every district. Think of this, the districts, it was 2,750 versus 505, and we got 312 electoral votes. Everyone said, maybe he can get 270. We got 312. It was a great election, and it has just revitalized the country. And I think I can say one other thing that's, to me, really incredible, that it can go so quickly. If you remember 6 months ago, prior to the election, we were unable to get people to join our military. We had a waiting list that was a mile long of empty spaces, and we couldn't get anybody to join. We didn't know actually what to do. Now, I wasn't in the administration, but they didn't know what to do. And it was embarrassing to them, frankly, and it should be. And that included police and firemen. You couldn't get people to join anything having to do with any of the military groups, any of the law enforcement groups, first responder groups. You couldn't get anybody to join. And as of yesterday, we had the largest number of recruits in the history of our country. Think of that. And the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, all of it, Coast Guard, all of them, they're full. And we have a waiting list.
That was President Donald Trump, who's live from Washington, D.C. in the U.S., where he announced that he has discussed a new tax bill with leaders in the House of Representatives, expressing hope that the Democrats will not obstruct the progress. He also emphasized the administration is working on legislation to deliver the biggest tax cuts in U.S. history, claiming it will be the best tax law the country has ever seen. Trump also stated that the administration will not allow Democrats to dismantle the low-cost health care program. He also spoke about the U.S. Treasury Secretary and his current negotiation for tariffs in 200 countries as part of a broader economic effort and plan. He discussed negotiating tariffs with almost 200 countries, and he talked about bringing religion back to the U.S. and continue a tradition that has been 250 years old of a day of prayer and worship. And he also talked about bringing the Olympics and the World Cup, and it happened all because of him. Back to the economic news. Oil prices rebounded on Thursday after strong earnings from Meta and Microsoft, supported by U.S. equities, and offset concerns about the U.S. economy and the prospect of higher OPEC plus oil output. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude futures rose 0.8% to $58.68 a barrel. Brent crude futures gained 1.2% at $61.77. Both contracts fell over 1% earlier. Gold dropped to a two-week low on Thursday, pressured by signals of softening trade tensions and a holiday in top consumer China, while focus was also on Friday's U.S. reports payroll to gauge the economic outlook. Spot gold was down 2.2% at $3,216.41 an ounce, after hitting its lowest since April 14th earlier in the session. Prices hit a record $3,500.05 per ounce last week. U.S. gold futures were down 2.8% at $3,226.90. That brings us to the end of our economic bulletin. Here's what we've been covering. Bank in Japan keeps interest rates and slashes economic growth. The U.S. unemployment claims unexpectedly increase. And the IMF warns countries in the Middle East and North Africa face significant economic challenges. This concludes our economic bulletin. Don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at QNewsEG to stay informed. Thank you for watching and stay tuned.